Wow, this is an absolute shocker. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury in the U.S., is now supposed to become the new Fed chairman and, according to Donald Trump, be appointed to the position. At least that's what Bloomberg is reporting. It's finally here. The U.S. and China have basically agreed on a framework for a new trade deal after 2 days of talks in London. Hyper bullish. This is what the entire market has been waiting for. We only have a few hours left until the next important inflation data comes out, right before the next Fed meeting. And according to some experts, there could be massive surprises, which could definitely lead to major volatility in Bitcoin. Cynthia Lummis wants to drastically cut taxes in the U.S., which could trigger the next pump. Fidelity says Bitcoin is just getting started and could still absorb between 450 and 900 trillion in capital. That's incredible. The CFTC candidate from Donald Trump actually said in a new statement that Bitcoin can transform our lives. How crazy is that? We're also not that far from an all-time high. So go ahead and smash the like button down below. Today, I'm even bringing out the bullish Bitcoin bar. Every time I bring out the Bitcoin bar here, the Bitcoin price usually goes up. I just hope the streak doesn't end here. So smash that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button, okay? I mean, just looking at this news alone, it's absolutely insane. CNBC is saying here that Bitcoin is now set for a pump. Now there's room for it to go even higher. New all-time highs above 130,000 US dollars are possible, according to the current Bitcoin chart. And yeah, that already sounds awesome, especially when even the mainstream media in the US are bullish on Bitcoin. Let me know in the comments below if you're bullish on Bitcoin too. We're also about to take a look at the new trading stories happening here in the US and what's going on with Jerome Powell. But now there's actually a new candidate from the CFTC, and he's being appointed or is supposed to be appointed by Donald Trump. And now we have the next Bitcoiner in the Trump administration, who's making some major pro-Bitcoin statements. What a time to be alive up here. Check out this intense clip real quick.
Second, I've had a direct line of sight into the future of this technology and how it could transform our lives. I view blockchain as a horizontal technology that has the potential to touch every aspect of society, not just as a vertical technology purely focused on financial services.
Did you hear that? He says here that Bitcoin technology can transform our lives, meaning change them and take them to a better level. Blockchain technology is horizontal here, meaning it's skyrocketing upwards. There are huge opportunities here. It can change every aspect of our lives. And that's obviously the crazy thing that a lot of people are realizing. Bitcoin isn't just a savings tool. Bitcoin isn't just money. It's actually a substance that expands or changes your consciousness. Of course, it's also money. Of course, it's also a technology. Of course, it's also a savings tool, and so on. Bitcoin is so much more. It's always really difficult to evaluate Bitcoin. What exactly is Bitcoin, anyway? Because Bitcoin can be so many things. For one person, it's ultra-resistant money. For another, it's a peace movement. And for someone else, it's something that expands consciousness. And that's the crazy thing that Bitcoin brings with it. And the crazy thing here is also, and this is what I always say, look at the incentives. Donald Trump, no matter who he appoints, whether it's a health minister or now the CFTC candidate who's supposed to come in, no matter who he names, they're all Bitcoiners, and each one is more bullish than the last. Scott Bessent, who we're going to look at now, is also not opposed to Bitcoin. We actually had the news here that Bloomberg is reporting that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is a possible candidate to succeed Fed Chairman Powell. Last week, Trump said his pick for the next Fed chairman would, quote, be announced very soon. And that would be absolutely huge. I mean, Scott Bessent already has a lot of influence as Treasury Secretary. But if Scott Bessent were to actually replace Jerome Powell, that would be a whole new level. We also need to know that apparently Scott Bessent meets with Jerome Powell for breakfast once a week. And Scott Bessent actually revealed this in an interview with Tucker Carlson. That means they're already in contact. Scott Bessent might already know what's going on at the Fed. He might already know which levers need to be pulled. And there was also a new statement from Bo Hines where he made it very clear, hey Donald, Trump, your agenda is to break up the sovereignty of various institutions, including the Federal Reserve. He basically wants to have direct impact here because in his opinion, it can't be that someone independent of Donald Trump can make any decisions. He has to be the big boss here. And yeah, recently some people commented below, are you stupid? Don't you know that the Federal Reserve is a private entity? Of course I know that, but nevertheless, Donald Trump wants to take control here. Donald Trump doesn't care. He basically wants to take control through the Federal Reserve. Honestly, I don't think he'll succeed. And a certain level of independence isn't necessarily a bad thing here. It's kind of a separation of powers that we might still have here. But yeah, Donald Trump wants even more power here. He wants to govern even more directly. And above all, he wants to push through his agenda at any cost. And that means lowering interest rates. He said he would lower interest rates by 1 to 2% to refinance the debt here in the US. And of course, someone like Scott fits that role much better than someone like Jerome Powell. What's also really interesting here is that tomorrow we'll probably get the last, well, consumer price, inflation index, inflation report here before the Fed meeting in June. And that's a very crucial, a very crucial release here. Expectations for the core CPI value in May have risen and are now at 2.6% per. This would be the first increase in core inflation of the consumer price index since January 2025. The question is inflation going to keep rising here? If inflation keeps rising, that's more bad news for Donald Trump because he actually wants inflation to go down and always says, inflation is going down, Jerome, so lower the interest rates. Yeah, but if it goes up, that's exactly what Jerome Powell suspects and says, hey, we can't lower interest rates yet because there's still too much inflation risk. If that actually happens tomorrow, or actually by the time you see this video, it'll be today since there's a bit of a time delay here, and I record at night, so that's how it always is, right? Yeah, and if it does turn out that inflation really goes up, then it could get very volatile in the markets again, because that would simply mean that the market might sell off, since the big interest rate cuts people were expecting might not actually happen. Alters just said yesterday that we'll see an interest rate cut next quarter. Then we have some news about the trade talks. According to Lord Bloomberg, the US and Mexico are close to reaching an agreement that would keep tariffs on steel imports at 50% up to a certain volume. The talks are currently being led by Trade Minister Ludnick, and the quotas would be set higher than those in a similar agreement during Trump's first term. So, yeah, I don't think this should be seen as all that negative. It looks like they're finding a deal between the US and Mexico that might not be so bad for either side. But the most important question is, what's going on between China and the US? I mentioned earlier in the video, or actually it was yesterday's video, that we'd probably get some news on this in the next few hours. But right now, there aren't any official confirmations that the whole thing has been finalized in detail. We did get confirmation that it's basically done, but the details are still missing. Everyone is waiting for that right now. And now there was also a message from Ludnick who said that, yes, Trade Minister Ludnick says the trade talks between the US and China are going very well, and he hopes they'll wrap up this evening, which for you guys would be last night. If necessary, according to Ludnick, the talks could continue until tomorrow. And now, just recently, there was another detail, basically right after this video was finished. After that, which for you would be around 5 in the morning or so, there were some new details, and let's take a look at what was posted, what new details there are. So, here are a few details coming out now that weren't available before. The US and China have agreed on a preliminary trade framework after talks in London. So, that's new. We knew that the deal was done. Now there's even a trade framework that they've agreed upon. The United States and China have, after 2 days of negotiations in London, basically agreed on a framework for trade. What basically means here, I'm not really sure. But apparently there's some kind of common ground, some sort of agreement. But whether it's already a done deal 100% is hard to say. It's difficult to judge if that's what this means. Lee explains that the framework is intended to implement the consensus reached by the leaders of both countries during a phone call on June 5th and at a previous meeting in Geneva. The outcome of the talks in London will now be submitted to the respective heads of state for further review. So, as it stands, there is a consensus, but not yet a final deal, just a pre-final deal, so to speak. The two sides have basically agreed on a framework for implementing the consensus reached by the two heads of state during the phone call on June 5th, as well as the consensus reached at the meeting in Geneva, Lee told reporters. No further details about the content of the framework were disclosed. So, we now have a few more details, but still not the final ones. And if final details do come out, and if they are, let's say, in line with what the market expects, that an agreement is reached just like it looks in this picture, then that could also have a positive effect on the markets. And then we have another really big development. Senator Cynthia Lummis now wants to introduce tax cuts in the US for Bitcoin and crypto. And that's really huge because it could be a major price driver. She says here that Bitcoin and digital assets are being unfairly taxed and targeted, and that we need revisions. We need a new classification for all of this, And that's just the thing. If Bitcoin is supposed to function as money, then you can't just lower the capital gains tax. You have to get rid of it completely. Bitcoin can only be money if the capital gains taxes are completely abolished here. I think 1 or 2 states in the US have now, I believe, abolished the capital gains tax on gold and silver. And that's exactly what would be needed across the entire USA as well. If you really want to make Bitcoin a superpower here in the USA wants to become the Bitcoin superpower of the world, as Donald Trump said, then you definitely have to abolish the taxes here. Otherwise, you can't become a Bitcoin superpower. That's absolutely the case here. Then we have Rumble, the $3 billion YouTube competitor, which now wants to integrate Lightning into its platform, into its crypto wallet. They have 78 million users here. I actually met the CEO, Pavlovsky or Pasaluski or something like that, here in El Salvador. He's also considering whether to move his company here to El Salvador. He was here together with Max Kaiser at his golf tournament. And he was just hanging out. And yeah, he was really, really well received by the people here in El Salvador because, of course, they rolled out the red carpet for him, since everyone here is interested in having him come to El Salvador. That would be huge, and especially awesome that he's betting on Bitcoin like this. They even have Bitcoin on their own balance sheet. And now let's listen to what the massive asset manager Fidelity has to say about Bitcoin. I also found it really, really astonishing, especially how advanced they already are in their analysis.
We're around 3 trillion in assets in the digital asset space. That is minuscule compared to the broader global wealth of assets, right? So my point is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the whole space is quite small relative to where traditional assets are. So if one were to think this is going to continue, then over time that should continue to grow, right? But
that might have just been a very, very short excerpt here, but it really packs a punch because what they've realized is, okay, the entire crypto sector is about 3 trillion, Bitcoin is just under 2 trillion, and compared to the global wealth of 900 trillion, or rather 450 trillion if you look at the monetary premium, where, let's say, wealth is being repurposed, that's really not much. When we compare that, we can really see just how early Bitcoin still is. And he says here, accordingly, Bitcoin is supposed to grow as well. Will Bitcoin completely absorb all of that? There are people who say Bitcoin will reach the full 450 trillion, like Jack Mallers, for example. Of course, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but they're definitely going to grab a big chunk. And now Fidelity is aware of that too, which is pretty huge. Let me know down below if you think we're going to break the all-time high this week. I definitely think in the long run, things are looking very, very bullish here. Guys, let me know down below what your general assessment is right now, how you're feeling about things. The mood here is really, really good by the sea. I'm about to go for a swim in the sea with the coconut palm up here. Let's fucking go. And if you still want to buy Bitcoin, if you're looking for a really cool platform to buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply, then I've put a link to 20 Bitcoin below. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. With the code BitcoinHotel, you always get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you soon. Until then, peace out.